Hello and welcome back, and that's right, it's time to talk about the best Plex NAS of the year. Right now, at the very closing stages of 2022, I think it's worth talking about which of the NASs out there are the best for Plex Media Server. 4K, 1080p, you name it, you want to enjoy your own multimedia, but with the bells and whistles that Plex gives you, the cast listing, the thumbnails, all of that scraped metadata in there. And in today's video, whether you're watching this now at the end of 2022, or you're watching it somewhere maybe halfway through 2023, take my word for it that all of the solutions I'm going to talk about today are damn fine Plex Media Servers. Just a question of scale, in terms of scale of performance, scale of numbers of multimedia files you can play at any given time, scale of the system itself, and ultimately that will affect the price and what they can do. But without further delaying things anymore, I do think it is worth highlighting that whether you go for any of the network attached storage solutions mentioned in today's video, this is about return on investment. You're not just going to use it for Plex. You might well, but it's good to know that these devices do other things. So regardless of which one you go for, you can rest assured that you will be able to do the following. Number one, it will be supported by Android, iOS, Windows, Mac, Linux, you name it. You can communicate with this system, with the system itself working actually, by the way, as an intermediary between different file platforms. Whether you're sharing a folder between your Mac and your Windows systems, but you want them all to be able to communicate via the middle like some kind of weird techno babelfish, or you're going to be utilizing the device to back up all of your different devices, your Android and your mobiles, from your iOS devices and more. Well, good news, this can communicate and utilize clients with mobile apps, by the way, and desktop apps for all of them. On top of that, all of these NAS devices will arrive with a surveillance platform included as well. So if you want to bang some cameras around, dotted around your home or business, you can do that and use the enterprise-grade surveillance software that most of these devices do arrive. They've all got surveillance platforms. I would argue not all of them are enterprise-grade in my opinion. Also, all of these are combined hardware-software solutions. They all arrive with the hardware included, with the exception of your storage media, and they all arrive with the ability to use their own software included. No licenses needed for the most part, although some of the software on these platforms, once you want to kind of move out of the easy small home user bracket, there may be the odd license for use included, but the bulk of the services are either license free or they at least have a few free licenses included with it on all of those services. They all support the latest and largest hard drives on the market right now, currently 22 TB at the time of recording, from the likes of WD or Seagate. Also, all of these are Intel powered. This is really important because all of these arrive with CPUs that have got integrated graphics on them. That's really important, because if you are going to be looking at denser 4K multimedia, particularly those of you that are going to be relying on client-side watching but server-side transcoding and management, that's where your integrated graphics comes in. A number of you may not be aware, when it comes to watching your multimedia, a lot of more modern multimedia utilizes a more modern and effective compression technique known as HEVC, highly efficient video codec, otherwise known as H.264. Now, prior to that was something known as H.265. Prior to that, sorry, bit of an error there, but I'm going to leave it in, was H.264, which was open source for the most part. It was completely free to use. It didn't cost you any buns. However, things as media got bigger and bigger and bigger, when you got these giant cinema screen kind of movies that need to be compacted down to be watched from the comfort of your sofa, that's where a more effective compression technique was needed. Hence the development of H.265, otherwise known as HEVC. However, it was a private venture with multiple parties holding the patent. The result is most devices need a license to be able to play back these files. Now, this is where that transcoded comes in, because when you're watching your multimedia collection, if you own a lot of HEVC media, and particularly 4K and 1080p high definition 4K media, these big files, if they're not able to be played on your client device, your mobile, your Amazon Fire Stick, your PlayStation, if you don't have an HEVC license on those devices, or those devices don't have the option to get a license, or do not enable client-side transcoding, that is when the device you're watching it on does all the reshaping, you are reliant on the NAS to do all of that reshaping, and that is where the better hardware comes in. That is where that integrated graphics is really important. So all of today's solutions have integrated graphics in one form or another. But that's enough of that. let's talk about the actual solutions themselves. And before we go any further, I want to give an honourable mention, because there are 5 solutions that I'm recommending for you for different reasons based on all-round overall performance, all-round solution, cost, price, and overall power. But I want to give an honourable mention to a NAS solution that has been in my Plex Media Server Best NAS of the Years for about 3 years. However, it's not going to be in it this year, and even though it's still available to buy, I don't think it can be in this list anymore. The honourable mention is, of course, this bad boy here, right here. This is the Synology DS920, arriving in early summer of 2020. That NAS device arriving with an Intel CPU inside there, thanks to Synology's great DSM software and just the ease of use and fluidity of the application, made it one of the best entry point 4K Plex Media Server NASs out there, and it had integrated graphics on board, unlike its newer generation follow-up released at the end of November 2022, which is the DS923, a great 10GB NAS with some incredible throughput, but due to its lack of integrated graphics, once you go down that road of maybe needing server-side encoding or transcoding or conversion, that is where that newer generation NAS falls down. But right now at the end of 2022, not only is the 920 still available, how long for, who knows, but it's also knocking around thanks to it having a new refresh model at a ridiculously low price. Considering it arrived on the scene between 550 and 600 Nikkei, you can pick this device up at certain sale events between 400 to 450. So I include it in this intro to the video before we get to the real winners, because it does deserve an honourable mention. It's been in our best ofs every year for a few years, and it still cuts mustard now. The TS464, my all-round best 1080p and 4K Plex Media Server NAS. Now, this is not the most expensive NAS on this list, but it's also not the most powerful NAS on this list. I include it because as an all-round NAS purchase, inclusive of Plex Media Server, it's a great solution to go for. Let me tell you why. Now, I could bang on about the hardware, take my word for it. All of the solutions I'm going to talk about today are going to have very similar internal hardware. They're almost all going to be running on the N5105 CPU inside a quad-core Intel Celeron integrated graphics processor. This system also arrives with 4 gig of DDR4 memory that can be upgraded to 16 gig, but you're not going to need more than about 8 a mega push for Plex Media Server. But what makes this stand out? Well, a few things. One, because it takes advantage of internal M2 NVMe slot that can be used for caching, as well as being used for raw storage pools, which can bolster particularly dense media. It's not the make or break option, but it's still nice to have that as an option. But on top of this, it's got an HDMI out at 4K, 60 frames per second for those of you that want to output, and a great HDMI application known as HD Station, which has several different versions of Plex Media Server, and indeed Kodi and MB and others that you can download either from their official store or some of them from the third-party store known as QNAP Club. On top of that, the system also has an upgrade slot, a PCIe upgrade slot that allows you to add more M2 NVMe base or enhanced network connections there for those of you that have got a much busier network. You'd be hard pushed to have your network above 1 GBE pushed when it comes to multimedia, but I think if you're running a particularly dense media in multiple locations, and particularly remote streaming, you might see the advantage on your local area network. It's negligible, but it would be more beneficial to larger, denser collections of streams, both in frequency and scale. But it's just overall, as a system, a NAS on its own and as a Plex Media Server NAS, that it really stands out for me. And running the latest updates for Plex Media Server downloaded from Plex Media Server site or from directly within the QNAP Zone QTS range of apps and services in their App Center, it's just, for me, although it's not the cheapest NAS on this list, it's the one that's the best combined purchase overall as a Plex Media Server NAS. Also, it runs quite quiet because it's in a plastic server casing there, and when it comes to 1080p, plays a lot. And if you saw my testing of 4K performance on this, it did very well indeed. You maybe get 1 or 2 streams out of it on a lot of those qualities, but still, you're probably not going to need much more than that. And as a 4-bay NAS that's been around in the market now for the better part of 2/3 of a year, its pricing is not too bad either. Next up, we're sticking with QNAP, and that's right, when it comes to silent NASes, and in some cases I do genuinely, truly silent, you've got to go to QNAP for a lot of these solutions, because more so than any other brand, they've really worked on producing low noise or silent NASes, and this one, the HS264, is a NAS I don't think gets anywhere near the credit it deserves. Now, unfortunately, let's get a couple of negatives out of the way. Number one, it's not genuinely silent. The NAS on its own is silent, but the minute you introduce hard drives, and particularly larger hard drives of above 8 to 10 TB, you're going to hear those drives. You're going to hear them click, hum and whir, and the vibration of them a little bit when they're sort of moving there in the background with the platters. There's nothing the NAS can do about that. You can get around it by using SSDs, of course, but SSDs, particularly in SATA, have something of a capacity low glass ceiling there. Now, the reason I'm kind of maybe giving it a little bit of a dig over that, even though the hard drives are not its fault, it's because it's a 2-bay. So this 2-bay NAS means you can only have 2 drives in that mirror, so you're kind of forced, for the most part when it comes to 4K, to go for higher capacity drives because of the size of 4K media these days, and even 1080p media as the quality gets higher and higher. So it seems weird to start it with a dig, but the reason I'm doing that is because I think we have to challenge that word silent. However, I've got to say, when it comes to low noise, it's by far the lowest noise NAS at this scale I've ever seen as a 2-bay, and notwithstanding, it's actually quite nice to look at. It's not a terrible looking chassis. It's very low scale. It will fit within many media centers out there. It has got the HDMI output. It arrives with 8 gig of memory by default. It's got the same CPU as the 464 that we just talked about there. It's got 2.5 GPE on board. It takes advantage of a dissipating heat panel there on the top. So again, although it doesn't have the M2 NVMe upgrades, it doesn't have that PCIe upgrade that one does, and it may cost a little bit more, but what you're paying for is a NAS in the background that doesn't have rotating fans on it. It doesn't have that larger chassis. It takes advantage of that passive heat dissipation and gives you the same quality of internal hardware for the most part, but also does it while making as little noise as possible. And those of you that genuinely like to enjoy your media and will probably maybe be outputting directly via the HDMI on this device into your ridiculous OLED TV for, you know, near zero latency, this may well be the system for you. Now, a number of you probably saw this coming. The Locker Store series has been in several of my best ofs at the moment. Now, let's be straight about this. It's more about the hardware than the software when I talk about it more, because I think ADM as a platform, as good as it is, or in of itself, the minute you compare it to, say, QNAP's QTS or Synology's DSM platform, it falls short a little bit. When it comes to the hardware, though, and particularly value for a Plex Media Server, whew, this thing kicks some bum. So, for example, notwithstanding it's already got that CPU, that M5105 that we talked about, it's got internal M2 NVMe's, it's got 4 of them though. So those of you that wanted to prioritize that faster internal media as storage pools, it's got 4 M2 NVMe pools there ready to rock. So this 4-bay becomes an 8-bay. And is it worth highlighting, although I'm mentioning this NAS and I was mentioning that NAS earlier, these are all available in different 2, 4 and 6-bay configurations, and the same goes to that Locker Store. Along with this, it has got that 2.5 GPE network connectivity. It's got an HDMI out, which is better than HDMI on nearly any other NAS out there, because it's HDMI 2.0B, which has an improved bandwidth sharing between HDR and SDR media, which means if you are outputting particularly dense HDR and you're going to be using the localized output for this directly into a TV using Acer Store's Portal HDMI parallel application, you're going to see better benefit for that localized connection of your media, and the output is going to be, it'll be 60 frames 4K, but it's just that bandwidth sharing against that larger connection. Now, it's got the LCD panel there for real-time information, so although that seems really minor, it is worth highlighting that if this is set up in your home environment, be it remotely or in the same room as the multimedia, you're going to be able to connect into it, you know, remotely with the apps. There's all the tools that we talked about. But also, if there's a beep, or if you want to know the temperature or the IP of the device you're trying to connect to it, even if it's over DLNA or something more complex, you can use the LCD panel to navigate in a way that the others don't. They restrict you into that ability of having to be forced to use a client hardware device or client application, and then get the login password and the credentials and the two-step verification. This allows you to do all of those, sure, but also get some real-time front-mounted information there. It's in the list, despite a lot of its hardware being very similar to the ones that I've talked about, because of its price point, because you're getting all of that hardware at a lower price point than any of the NASs I've talked about thus far. And what you get for that money in terms of its value and the hardware architecture with it makes it largely, inarguable as a great 4K and 1080p multimedia server. Its software, as I say, ADM on its own, doesn't quite stack as well as QTS or DSM I've talked about, and the chassis, metal all the way around, will make a little bit more noise in operation, not substantially, but definitely a noticeable pinch. But still, as far as value goes and what you're getting for your money with those extra M2 NVMe slots built into the top there, the LCD panel, the enhanced HDMI there on the rear compared with others, it's just a great value package as a NAS for both Plex and outside of that. Now, we talked about value, let's actually talk about price, the lowest price out there. Now, I mentioned in the introduction that all of the NASs that I'm going to talk about today are Intel graphics enabled processors there, and it's the same CPU again with the M5105. But what you have to bear in mind is we could have talked about some Realtek, we could have talked about some value series NASs, a couple of £100 slide that slid off the top there. But had we gone for those, yes, they would have been a low price, but at the same time they would have been NAS solutions that will struggle with any of that conversion or transcoding that we talked about. There are also NASs that will struggle if you try to do more than one stream of even native media there, because of the lack of embedded graphics and also them being ARM processors, ARM, be they V8 64-bit processors or even the older 32-bit. The reason I bring this up, the F4423, is because it has that same CPU, it has the same kind of memory, it's got 2.5 GBE, it's got M2 NVMe upgrade slots, it's got all of that the other NASs that I've talked about, but the price point is a joke how cheap it is compared to the others. When I mentioned the Acer Store earlier and I was talking about the value of what you get with it, its price point is still noticeably higher than this. The F4, even when the F4 isn't on sale, its price point is cheaper than QNAP's, it's cheaper than Synology, it's cheaper than Acer Store. But the fact that the F4 is regularly on sale, not just Black Friday and Prime Day and the likes, but also third-party regular sales throughout the year, this system has a tendency to be on sale quite a lot, because TerraMaster, they really do produce a lower price solution there. Now, their software, I will add, again, much like ADM, it's good, and it's got some nice features in it. It's got photo recognition, it's got that surveillance platform, it's got the isolation mode built in, it runs on BTRFS, like Synology, like Acer Store, but it's trading on its hardware. And the fact that you can utilize this bare bones hardware if you choose, whether you want to put true NAS on this, a very straightforward installation, or you want to use ADM at the lowest degree and concentrate directly on Plex Media Server. I'm not going to say it's the most efficient NAS of the ones that I've talked about. It's not. In my Plex Media Server testing, it felt like it was using a little bit more power to do the average job than the other NASs I've talked about. But what I will add is at the price point, if you're looking for all of the hardware features one way or another that I've talked about thus far for Plex Media Server to enjoy your 4K and your 1080p, but you don't want to break the bank, this is a great option. And add to that this and Synology, the only brands right now in commercial NAS outside of Drobo, who seems to be a bit dead, is their fluid RAID system, T-RAID. It allows you to go ahead and install 1 or 2 drives straight off the bat. These all are supplied with support of that. But T-RAID allows you to mix and match drives. So on day one, you can put in a couple of 4 TBs if your money's really tight, or even 2 TBs if you choose. And then a few years down the line, start introducing larger hard drives as your budget allows or the cost of hard drives drops. Why is that important? Well, traditional NASs that use traditional RAID, like QNAP and Acer Store, these systems will not let you mix and match drives. If you mix and match drives with larger capacities, they will class every single drive as the lowest available capacity, whereas fluid RAID systems like T-RAID on TerraMaster or Synology's SHR allow you to mix and match drive capacities, and it will always maintain a safety net of redundancy for the largest available drive, and then give you access to all of the other capacity in a way that Acer Store and QNAP do not. And again, remember, lowest price of the lot, and now the more flexible option when it comes to buying the storage. So ultimately, as a day one purchase, it makes it the lowest price 4K and 1080p converting and transcoding Plex Media Server solution I would recommend. Which brings us inevitably to this chunky monkey. This device has already been in one shape or form in several of my best of categories of 2022. Yes, it is so expensive, particularly when you're looking at the price of the TerraMaster just now. When you look at the price of this, which can range, depending on the hardware configuration you go for, between $2,000 and $3,000, it is not cheap. But for those of you that are looking for a multimedia behemoth, it's really tough to argue with the TVS H874. Now, unlike the other solutions that I've talked about that have got 5th generation Celerons in the 5105, this system will either arrive with, depending on the config you choose, a 6-core, a 12-core, I believe. I think it's a 16-core, and I'm sure the notes on the screen will disagree with me, with multi-thread processors in the 12th generation Intel Core family, i5, i7, and an i9 CPU. Even the integrated graphics on this CPU are insane, with also this system supporting graphics card installations as well. There is nothing this system cannot play. To put it into perspective, and again, I recommend you check out my review for the 874 or my Plex testing, which I should hope will be live before this video. The heaviest video I test on my channel is a 400 megabits per second HEVC Ultra HD HDR 4K file. It's a 30-second jellyfish file that's 1.4 gigabytes in size for 30 seconds of footage. It breaks NASes. I have seen that file make NASes crash. That file has never been played by more than about 4 NASes in the history of this channel. With this NAS, not only playing it, it barely crept into double figures of percentage. That is a file that will still be out of reach in terms of commercial multimedia in a decade from now, in terms of where we are with commercial grade multimedia. That 400 megabit HEVC, and this thing barely broke a sweat playing it. I even played that file in 2 different browser windows while running 2 cameras in surveillance, while running 2 virtual machines, one Ubuntu, one Windows 10, whilst running a container and a system scan, and the system reached 21% CPU usage. What I'm saying is this thing is a behemoth of powerhouse possibility. On top of that, it's an 8-bay system, so 8 bays of storage. Whether you're going to scale it down the road, remember it doesn't have that fluid RAID system, but still you can use traditional RAIDs and populate it gradually if you choose. It also has the option of ZFS or ext4 file systems, though bear in mind scaling and increasing your storage in the QUTS ZFS platform isn't as straightforward. If you try to expand your storage, you're just creating more bucket RAIDs altogether. Not only alongside that CPU and potentially 64 gig of memory, starting at 16 gig of DDR4, 3200 megahertz memory, this system also has PCIe Gen 4 architecture. Do you remember earlier on when I mentioned some of these devices have got M2 slots that you can put your media on to kind of benefit the performance and throughput internally, to let the faster M2 NVMEs to deliver the media faster for the system to maybe output the media a little better? Gen 4 is a bandwidth of 8,000 megabytes per second, and although the SSDs that go inside, like the WD Black SN850, the Seagate Viacuda 530, the Samsung 980 Pro, are not the cheapest SSDs, this has got 2 slots inside. With each of those SSDs can crank out 6,000 to 7,000 megabytes per second each, and you can still RAID them. And there's a PCIe Gen 4x16 slot as well if you want to put in some insane performance upgrade cards and more. What I'm saying is, when it comes to 4K and 1080p, and I would dare to say 8K multimedia in the future, this is where it lives. And this NAS will set you in good stead for years. It's a follow-up to the 2018 generation TVS 872XT, another NAS that was regularly in my Plex recommended lists for the last few years, and this thing is just an insane upgrade in every other regard. I could talk about the HDMI, the 2.5 GBE, the option of 10G or the i9. All of that's irrelevant to you for Plex Media Server. In the case of this, if you're looking for a Plex NAS where you don't want to have to think about it for quite a long time, it's a great system to go for. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. We talked about a lot of hardware. It's been very QNAP heavy, but I think we have to at least acknowledge that QNAP have released a lot more hardware than everyone else in 2022, and it was sort of inevitable to go down this road. But it doesn't take away from the silent NAS, from that 464 or this behemoth here. And well done to all the other brands that we talked about. And I just wish we could talk about a Synology. I'm sure someone in the comments will highlight the DS3622XS Plus. It is a great NAS, but it doesn't have integrated graphics, and it will work and have to struggle for those transcodes, as we saw in our Plex testing. Other than that, if you do have any other comments for this video, do throw them down below. If you have enjoyed this, click like. Ever since YouTube basically killed the utility of the dislike button, it really helps us out. If you want to learn more, there's the links to guides in the description for this and other best ofs for 2022 and 2023. If you need help, the free advice section over on NAS Compares, or the free community forum manned by me, Eddie, and other members of the NAS community, Ask NAS Compares. And finally, if you found this video helpful, very important, and if you were going to buy from Amazon anyway, again, only if you believe and agree with those two statements, please use the links in the description, because if you use those, it won't cost you anything extra. It will take you to Amazon in your region, and then whatever you buy after getting there, NAS or otherwise, a small sum will make its way back to me and Eddie here at NAS Compares as Amazon associates, and that money goes directly back into us doing what we do. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Have a great 2023, and I'll see you next time.